Hey, what's up guys, Guardian here, coming guys with a deck profile on my brand new Sanctuary deck, Gramgrace. Yeah, we finally have set 8 out in English, and Gramgrace is with us as well from Days. And yeah, this deck's actually pretty fun. It's actually a very just solid foundation of a Keta Sanctuary deck, and it's pretty interesting because there's a few different ride lines you can go with, and there's a lot of good generic staples in Keta Sanctuary that just work with this deck. I've actually got some examples of the stuff that I can show you later, but I'll go through the deck and show you guys what I'm running in this list since there's quite a few things that you can play. Yeah. So without further ado, let's go through the deck and I'll show you guys what I'm playing. So to start with, we have of course the ride line. So the ride line I decided to go with was the one that tested the best across all of them. I decided to go with the Wingull, the Merrin, and the Blaster Dark ride line. The reason for this is because the Blaster Dark can actually call out the Wingull Brave from the soul, since I'm not playing any blasters in the main deck, obviously, which means we can guarantee retire something for Blaster Dark's counterblast, and also have a Twin Drive for that turn to pressure the opponent. And also, what we can do with this is that we can pair up a Blaster Dark Twin Drive with a Painkiller Angel, which we then retire to then draw another card to get deeper into our deck. And then it also frees the space up so that you can then call something there with Gramgrace's effect, and also have a sizable Blaster Dark attack with a Twin Drive that's pressuring enough to make that Twin Drive feel worthwhile. Because at least with 18k, you'll be able to squeeze through a crit to then push your opponent on damage, hopefully. Yeah. And then also getting that spot retire sometimes against the right matchup can actually be pretty good. Now, of course, the downside to this is that you do lose out a card in your soul, but we do compensate for that with some other cards in the deck that allow us to generate some soul through their own effects. Yeah. So this is the one I felt like tested the best. I did try Javelin, but Javelin's issue is that if you see an order card, you just don't get a unit, which would feel quite bad if you see the Blitz order or maybe any other order cards that you're playing, like the new Chalice order. For the Persona Ride power. So I felt like Merrin was like the safer option to go with, and even though you do lose the soul with Wingull, we have ways to recuperate that at least. So with that explained, let's go over the main grade 3 of the deck with Gramgrace. So Gramgrace is really cool. He's got 3 different effects, but he's pretty simple. So the first one is continuous Vanguard. If you Persona Ride this turn, your Persona Ride increases the power of your back row units as well. So Persona Ride usually does the front row, but with Gramgrace, it also affects the back row. So your rear guards are going to be really, really sizable. Gramgrace also has a second skill, which is Counterblast Soul Blast. Draw a card, then choose a card from your hand and call it to a back row center rear guard circle, and until the end of the turn, that unit can attack from the back row and gains 10,000 power. So yeah, you can just call something to the circle behind Gramgrace, it can attack, which means this deck is capable of 4 attacks in the deck, which is really solid, and it gains 10k, which it means it's most likely going to be sizable enough to get at least around a defensive trigger, which is really, really nice. And then the final skill is that at the end of that battle, that your back row center rear guard attacked, you can put that unit into the soul and then draw a card. So you get a soul back for your follow-up turn, and you get a draw, so you refill your hand back up. Yeah, Gramgrace is pretty nutty overall. He's pretty solid as a foundational grade 3. And because he doesn't have a ride line yet, maybe they might do one in the future, we have some generic ride lines that we can just play with him that just synergize well. Yeah. And I do know that some people might be a bit concerned with the Counterblast or Blaster Dark, but we're usually not calling stuff down in the early game besides in like maybe the Painkiller for the Dark boost. So we don't have to worry about CB denies much. And also we do have some outlets of countercharge on the deck, which would help us there as well. Yeah, with that being explained for the ride deck, let's go over the main deck. So of course, with this being a Persona Ride focus deck, we have to play the 3 additional copies of Gramgrace. Yeah, pretty simple, straightforward. Get the 10k to the front row and the back row and facilitate some really big rear guard attacks and pushes. So really, really good. It is very vital that we see the Persona Rides. And we also are playing things in the deck to help us see them as well. Okay, so next I'm also playing 3 copies of Fasado. This card's quite nice because it refunds you a counter charge and a soul charge, which Gramgrace both use, of course. But I'm also doing this for two other reasons. One is that I have another card in the deck that also requires some resources, so that also helps to have these. But also it's a grade 3, which means it actually helps you with a unit that we have in the deck called Language Chat, which is basically a way for you to get a 15k attacker or booster, as long as you have a grade 3 in your soul, which with the 3 Fasado, you can actually call this with the Gramgrace effect, put it into your soul afterwards, and then you have a grade 3, which means the language chats are now live and can be attacking or boosting depending on what you want to do. So yeah, I am aware that Gramgrace does have a promo card in Japan, which allows it to gain extra drive checks, but we don't have that in English to my knowledge, so I'm sticking with the Fasados for the time being. I still think it's a good enough card to be playing. And also, don't forget, this is a grade 3, so if you are fortunate enough to see the overtrigger in any of your games, this will be performing a twin drive, so do bear that in mind as well. And also, if you are attacking with that back row center rear guard, remember that will be that will be getting its drive checks as well through the overtrigger, so do bear that in mind. It's pretty brutal. It may or may not have happened recently, so yeah, first-hand experience has showed to be for that to be a good thing. Now, for the last grade 3, we have to go over obviously the Gradius Gradale, or Chalice is basically what me and my friends have been calling it, because it's basically a chalice, right? Yeah, it basically just activates Persona Ride. So this is of course the pricey double rare of set 8, being that it activates Persona Ride for you. But it's really good. Like I said, you need to get Persona Ride activated, and sure, you may miss out on a soul, but as long as you've got the soul there that you need, and you've got the Persona Ride active, you have Gramgrace rocking and rolling with the massive power columns. So yeah, definitely want to play one copy of this. So that is it for the grade 3s, so we'll go over the grade 2s. This is going to be a little bit odd, because I'm actually playing a lot of 3-ofs in the deck, but you have to acknowledge here that because I'm doing 3-ofs, it means I have more wiggle room to put more utility in the deck. Since there's no real, like, you must play this card at 4 in the deck, besides on, like, Gramgrace, since most of the stuff in this deck is, like, good, good Keta stuff deck. So the first good stuff card we're playing is the 3 copies of Kerabri. So I have been bouncing back and forth with this card, with also Cadwalla. So Cadwalla we might recognize from the Youthberg trial deck, and just Youthberg in general, because it does play that card usually. Now, I decided on the Kerabri because with me playing the Fasado build with the countercharging, and then also a couple of other outlets as well of countercharge, it kind of felt a bit wasteful for me to not have another card in the deck that can at least counterblast. And I was testing this order card out, which definitely can help because it draws you cards. But it's not a full-on guarantee that you'll get bodies to call to the board. And that's why I decided to go back to Kerabri, was because this card says when it's placed on rear from anywhere, you can counterblast Soul Blast, look at top 3, call a grade 2 or less, and then if you didn't, add a grade 3 to your hand. So it facilitates 2 things this deck wants to do. It wants to build a board so that it benefits from Gramgrace's power skill from the Persona Ride, but then it also helps you dig for your Gramgraces for the Persona Ride. So it's pretty good overall. Now, I can understand if you wanted to replace this with the Cadwalla, that is perfectly fine. I think either or works, but I do like the fact that the Kerabri kind of helps me use my resources a bit more effectively, and I'm not just using it for the Gramgrace every turn, which you do want to be doing, but if I have the excess Counterblast, I'd like to put that to use in some way, especially if I'm going to be getting it back through my other skills as well, like the Fasado, for example. So yeah, 3 copies of Kerabri. It's pretty generic and pretty nice, so do pick your hands up on that if you are wanting to play this. But you can play the Cadwalla if you want to. And then the next card I'm playing is the 3 copies of Drilling Angel. Now, Drilling Angel is pretty nice because it helps you get soul back, basically, which, as you can see, you may need every now and then with Gramgrace and the Kerabri, both using soul. Then also drilling the Painkiller Angel as well. It also has a nice little interaction with the Kerabri in that you could put this back from your drop zone into your soul and then look at top 3 for another copy and call that. Of course, playing 4 of will be more preferable there to get more consistency, but you're not really doing this for the random plussing side of it. That's just a cherry on top. You're mainly doing this with a soul charge, just so that you can make sure that your soul is packing enough so that you're not getting cooked out of any soul blasting skills that you might need to do. So, yeah. And it's also a main phase soul charge, which, for Sado and the other card that I'm playing, you only really get the soul charge later, which, it really shows that the Drilling Angel having a soul charge in the main phase does matter. So I do like playing 3 copies of this. It's a nice generic card, as we all know of. So the next grade 2 I'm playing, again, another 3 of, is 3 copies of Language Chat. This is a card I was talking about before, which if you have a grade 3 in your soul, it gets 5k power continuously and the ability to boost, which means it's a 15k. Which is really good because behind a Versado, it's going to be 28. Your grade 2s will be 25, which is really good when you're going first, since your opponent will be grade 2, and that's a 20k guard. So, yeah. And like I said, you can facilitate this quite well by putting the Versado into the soul with your Gramgrace skill. So, yeah, I actually really like this. It's very flexible, and if you don't need it as a booster, you can just use it as an attacker. It's still as good as any. So, really nice flexible grade 2. That came from set 7, I believe. So Language Chat's pretty cool. And then I'm also playing 2 copies of the new grade 2 from set 8, which is Turnar. So this is basically the alternative countercharge in the deck, in that at the end of the battle that attacks, while boosted, if your damage zone has 3 or more face down cards, you put this card into your soul and then countercharge. Now, this is the reason why I only played 2 of this right now. You could bump to 3 maybe, or more if you want to. But because I have the Versados in the deck, I don't feel like I need more of this. And also, this is kind of a mid to late game card because you need to have 3 damage, and they all need to be face down, which means you're already sort of like the midpoint of the game when you're getting to your grade 3 turn. So I feel like having, you could get away with 3 perhaps, but I think 2's fine, especially in the Versado build. Since I want the Versados in the deck to support the Language Chats. So, yeah, I feel like 2 of this is perfectly fine, but you can play 3 if you want to. But I wanted the extra space because I wanted to play 1 copy of Maple, which is great because you just keep bringing it back over and over again. Every time you ride, it even comes back on your first grade 3 turn, so it just gives you a free body to help fill the board back up to benefit from Gramgrace's power skills. So yeah, Maple, very nice one-of for any Keta deck. So that is it for the grade 2s. So for the grade 1s, we are going to be playing the 3 copies of Painkiller Angel. Like I said, I wanted to put these in the deck to help facilitate the grade 2 turn to be more powerful, so that when Blast Attack's attacking with the Twin Drive, 18k is a lot more threatening. And it means that you can at least push the opponent on damage, so that by the time your turn 3, turn 4 rolls along, you'll be able to capitalize on that and hopefully go for game. But yeah, I didn't want to go for 4. I would love to play 4 of this, but again, deck space is a bit of an issue. But yeah, I feel like 3 for that purpose is kind of good enough. So yeah, I went for 3 copies of the Painkiller. But it's still a good card because it digs you through the deck and hopefully gets you to your extra copies of Gramgrace for the Persona ride. And for the next grade 1, it's actually one of my favorites. It's actually just a common card that came out of set 7. 3 copies of Cinnabluga. So very simple skill. If your opponent's Vanguard is a grade 3, during your turn, this unit gets 5k power. So yeah, it's a 13k attacker or booster, depending on what you need it for. It's also just a really good call target that you can bring out with Gramgrace behind it, since it will be attacking for 23, so it can get over a defensive in case you don't want to be calling the Versados, for example. But besides from that, you can just call this to your rearguard columns and have a solid 13k booster to make all of your 10k grade 2s become 23, or maybe something like your Language Chat become 28. So yeah, Cinnabluga just makes really good column numbers, and it's just a very flexible grade 1. Do be careful with this though, because I have a friend that plays a Magnolia deck, and they have a grade 2 where it can prevent me from blocking, guarding with stuff, with the grades of my units on the field. So when you're calling this against that deck, it is a grade 1, so you won't be able to perfect guard against that unit, which is risky. But like I said, you can still put these to use with Gramgrace by calling it to the back row center, attacking with it, and then it goes into soul afterwards. and then maybe you could still boost with cards like your Painkiller Angel, which then remove themselves, or even your language chats, because those are grade 2s, so you won't be as affected there, in case that is a matchup that you have to go against. So something's just a bit of food for thought there, basically. Alright, and then the last main, normal unit, I guess, is the one copy of the new Maple, the Pink Moth Girl Maple. Kind of similar to the grade 2, except that you have to basically Persona Ride with this one, but it's still just good discard fodder for the ride deck, or maybe a perfect guard, and then you can bring this out later when you Persona Ride, and also it will get 5k power, which means it's going to be a 13k attacker or booster, similar to the Cinderbluga, but of course with this one it's recurable, because you can bring it out later. So yeah, nice one-off. So we're playing both copies of the new, of the Maple cards, but this one is a newer one. So to go over the final grade 1 of the deck, we of course have our Blitz Order PG and our 3 regular PG. Just pretty simple stuff, very straightforward. Alright, now last we have the triggers. Now I am pretty confident with these triggers because I tested this deck out during January, and yeah, I'm pretty happy to say that, I mean, of course we have the Over Trigger. I mean, why wouldn't you play that? But yeah, Over Trigger, pretty simple. Get the drive checks on all of those rear guards, including the one that you call with Gramgrace to the back row center. But in terms of the usual triggers, we have 4 of the skill crit and 4 of the normal vanilla crit. Yeah, 8 crit. We have multi-attack in the deck. We have numbers. Crits just seal the game, basically. So crits win games, simple as that. And the skill of the skill crit can maybe come up sometimes, just to, I don't know, give a Fasado 2k power, so it's 15, so you can make better numbers there. Maybe, but it's very few and far between. It doesn't come up that much. But one thing I will agree with here is I do think front triggers is the way to go in this deck, because I did test draws, and it did feel good to draw a bunch of cards, but there were some deck out issues. Unsurprisingly, right? There were some deck out issues there, but the reason the front triggers just feel better is because it just gives you that extra power, which you surprisingly don't think you need. But actually, that extra power on those units makes a huge difference, because that could be like, that could go from a 2-card guard to a 3-card guard, and then you're just diminishing your opponent's hand size. And let's not forget, the 20k shield of this is actually pretty crucial sometimes, and it actually just stops the tracks of these really aggressive decks from just capitalizing on you like straight away. So from testing the draws and the fronts, I do think the fronts feel better in this deck, just in terms of closing potential. And then the final card of the deck, of course, is our 4 heal trigger, which I'm just going with the generic one from set 6, I believe. Yep. Looks pretty nice. Nice artwork. But like I always like to say, put some skill heals in the deck if you want to play those. I always just go for the generic ones anyway when it comes to decks. But yeah, that is basically it for the deck. So Gramgrace has been really enjoyable to play. Honestly, this deck has been an absolute blast testing, and then also just experimenting with a bunch of different cards it can play. Just to quickly go over some stuff that I did test. Like I say, I already mentioned some of these in the video, but yeah, we have, this one I didn't mention. This one's called Gwendolyn. It's basically kind of like a Dorian skill with a guarding restriction on it. That's pretty cool. There's the Ununculate Angel, which is something you could try from set 6. Not too bad. We of course have the new Order card as well. Draws using cards, but I don't know. It's good. You can definitely play that in the deck. And of course you have your Cadwaller as well, which is also good. Yeah, it's Keta good stuff, basically. It's as simple as that. So if you've got good Keta cards, you will most likely see some results with this deck. But in terms of fine-tuning it and getting it to a state that I like, this is what I settled on. But like I said, you can swap cards in and out depending on what you want to go for. But yeah, that's going to do it for the deck. Hope you guys enjoyed. Bit of a long one, just because it's a new ride line on the channel, but I enjoyed doing this. I've been waiting for Gramgrace to come out now for a little bit. Well, since Dia Days, really. But yeah, it's been a really fun time playing this deck. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Deck log will be in the description as always, and I will catch you guys in the next video. So like always, this is Guardian 205, signing out.